Tucker throwing punches. They have to be
Everybody has that one player they just can't stand. Even NBA legends built like granite refrigerators with jump hooks. And Karl Malone? Yeah, he had a whole list. Some grudges were funny, some were petty, some got bloody. So buckle up, because today we're counting down the guys he absolutely could not stand. We're starting with Isaiah Thomas. The name alone tells you this one is serious. Some NBA beefs age into comedy. This is not one of them. This one starts with skin splitting, blood on hardwood, and a grudge that never healed in any real way. Go back to December 1991, Pistons versus Jazz. Detroit was still Detroit, scrappy, sharp, mean in all the smart ways. Utah was rising behind Stockton and Malone, and Karl had that habit of sending messages with his shoulders. Thomas drove the lane the way he always did, fearless, steady, no hesitation. Malone stepped into the play and swung an elbow that caught Isaiah so cleanly across the forehead that the cut needed 40 stitches. Not 4, 40.
But did Malone throw the elbow with vicious intent?
Thomas immediately said Malone tried to kill him. It was not a joke. He said it because that is exactly how it felt. Detroit saw the replay and lost it. They knew physical basketball. They invented half the tricks teams still use. But what they saw looked like something different. The league suspended Malone for 1 game and tacked on a fine. Pistons players wanted more. Utah said play on. That split set the tone for everything that followed. 2 entirely different interpretations of the same violent moment. People forget the buildup. Detroit had embarrassed teams for years with their traps and bumps and perfectly timed cheap shots. Utah was tired of wearing those badges like they were fun souvenirs. When a team has been through that kind of strain, tempers wait for any excuse to erupt. The elbow just happened to be the spark. Thomas had torched the Jazz earlier that season. Utah did not like that. Malone never admitted any revenge angle, but the timing always hung in the air like smoke.
throwing punches. They have to be restrained.
The part that kept this feud alive was Malone's refusal to soften. For decades, he said it was just a hard play. That he would never apologize for the way he played. That is a fine stance when you are talking about box outs or strong finishes. It hits differently when the other guy still carries a scar on his forehead. Even years later, when Malone tried to clarify and said he meant to hit Thomas but did not mean to cause that level of damage, it did nothing. Thomas heard it as a non-apology and treated it like noise. Next up is one of Carr's biggest off-court rivals, Dennis Rodman.
They've got to call a flagrant here. They've got to call a flagrant.
And if the Isaiah chapter felt sharp, this one feels loud. Rodman didn't whisper his opinions. He yelled them with hair dye and elbows. Malone didn't whisper either. He answered with force. That mix guaranteed trouble long before either man pretended to wrestle on national TV. Their story starts in the late 80s, when Detroit was perfecting the art of making scorers miserable. Rodman was the engine of that misery. Endless energy, perfect timing, zero fear. He poked giants in the ribs and then sprinted past them for rebounds. Malone hated that. Not because he couldn't handle the contact, but because Rodman turned every play into a dare. You want space? Earn it? You want rhythm? Good luck. Malone was used to battling bigs. Rodman felt like wrestling a live wire. Then came the 90s. Utah was winning real games. Chicago was setting the standard for everything. Rodman landed on the Bulls, and suddenly these two collided in higher stakes moments. Every matchup carried an attitude. Rodman pulled at Malone's arms. He slid under his legs on boxing out angles that existed only in Dennis Rodman geometry. Malone answered with hits he didn't bother to disguise. Those interactions weren't random. They were patterns. Rodman wanted to irritate you until you lost your composure. Malone did not lose composure often, but Rodman found the right buttons almost every time. This was never a polite rivalry. Rodman said publicly that he didn't like Malone. Not his game, not his vibe, not the way he carried himself. He respected the numbers, sure, but the personality clash was real. Malone didn't say much on camera, but the body language in games said enough. Every shove had a purpose. Every rebound fight looked personal. You could feel the heat, even through old VHS grain. By 1998, the tension had gone from basketball to entertainment without losing authenticity. WCW needed star power. Rodman and Malone signed on. It looked like a spectacle, and it was, but the edge wasn't fake. They didn't need scripts to sell a rivalry they already lived in. When two athletes agree to carry their beef into another sport entirely, that tells you the frustration didn't end with the final buzzer. And now we move to Michael Jordan.
Congratulations, Karl Malone, 1996-97.
The one name you knew would show up eventually. Every star from that era has a Jordan story, but Malone's version has its own flavor. The respect was there, sure, but the irritation, that was very real. Jordan knew exactly how to poke him, and he never passed up the opportunity. Start with the finals in the late 90s. Utah was right there. The roster was tight, the system polished, the window wide open. They ran into Chicago twice, and both times Jordan turned the whole thing into a psychological marathon. Malone wasn't just battling the best player on the planet, he was battling the best talker, the best timer, the best needler. Jordan didn't do it gently. He jabbed. He laughed. He whispered things only Malone could hear. It wasn't trash talk for headlines. It was pressure applied with precision. Everyone remembers the line. Game 1, 1997 Finals. Scottie Pippen walked by Malone and dropped the now legendary, "Mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays." Jordan grinned. The building buzzed. Malone missed the free throws. Chicago closed. That moment stuck to him like static. And even though the words came from Pippen, everyone knows where the echo came from. Jordan replayed that joke for years without even saying it again. He didn't need to. The impact did the talking for him. Jordan had a way of shrinking the air around big games. He pulled defenders into his gravity and teammates into his pace. The Bulls' defense turned drives into traps. Stockton's pockets vanished. Malone's mid-range catches came with hands already digging at his waist. Those finals weren't simple matchups. They were long tests of focus. Jordan made sure Malone never had a clean breath. That is what bothered Karl the most. Not the scoring, not the accolades, the constant psychological pressure that never shut off. You can see it in the footage. Every time Malone wrestles for position, Jordan walks by and mutters something. Every time Malone hits a jumper, Jordan does that tiny half smile that reads like a dare. These weren't friends competing. These were two forces colliding. And Malone hated the way Jordan tilted the emotional temperature of every moment. And the resentment didn't evaporate with retirement. Malone rarely speaks about Jordan with the warm nostalgia other legends use. He'll acknowledge greatness, but never with the glow. There's a dryness to it, a distance, part competitive pride, part lasting sting. Losing 2 straight finals to the same superstar will do that, especially when that superstar used your missed free throws and your frustration as fuel. That brings us to the next name on Malone's list, a player who helped twist the knife at the worst possible moment, Scottie Pippen. This wasn't loud beef. It wasn't theatrical. It was the kind of rivalry that stings because the moments never fade. Especially one moment in 1998 that still replays in every Utah highlight package whether Jazz fans want it there or not. Start with the line, "Mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays." Everybody knows it. Everybody quotes it. Pippen dropped it in Malone's ear before those free throws in Game 1 of the 97 Finals. The timing was cruel. The delivery was clean. The outcome was brutal. Malone missed both. Chicago stole the game. And even though the words didn't come from Jordan, the effect attached itself to Malone's legacy almost instantly. Pippen later admitted they targeted Malone mentally. He wasn't guessing. He was telling the truth. Their games clashed in a way that naturally created friction. Malone operated through power, straight lines, hard screens, clean angles. Pippen played like an elastic band stretched to its limit. Long arms, perfect footwork, delays disguised as patience. He bothered Malone with craft rather than noise. The digs came earlier than expected. The contests came later than seemed possible. Every possession felt like it had a shadow attached to it. And then came the moment that sealed the rivalry forever. Game 6, 1990, 8 finals, 4th quarter. Utah needed a bucket. Malone caught the ball on the block with his back set and the timing exactly where he wanted it. That's the shot he made 1,000 times. Pippen slid in behind him, reached at the perfect angle, and stripped the ball clean. No foul, no hesitation, just precision. Chicago ran the other way and finished the job. Utah never recovered. Malone never forgot it. That strip still hangs over the conversation. It's the kind of play that enters a player's personal mythology. All the strength in the world didn't matter because Pippen understood the rhythm of Malone's post catches. He knew when the ball settled. He knew when the dribble dropped. And he chose that exact second to take it away. A superstar got outsmarted by another superstar, and the clip became eternal. The resentment sits in the way Malone talks about those series. He gives Chicago credit. He acknowledges how hard the Bulls defended. But when it comes to Pippen specifically, the tone tightens. You can hear the irritation under the surface. Pippen didn't bully him. He outmaneuvered him. And for a player who prided himself on discipline and fundamentals, that sting hits deeper than a shove or a foul ever could. The funny part is that Pippen never treated it like a feud. He talked about Malone with the same cool confidence he used for everyone else. He said their plan was simple: disrupt the catch, force decisions, make Malone think. That simplicity is exactly what Malone hated. One of the greatest scorers in NBA history kept running into a defender who turned his strengths into traps. And now we move into the name that blew everything up in a single season, and that's Kobe Bryant.
How about Kobe? Y'all cool?
Absolutely.
Y'all had a beat, y'all had a little issue.
This chapter didn't simmer over years. It didn't grow out of playoff grudges or physical battles. It arrived suddenly during the 2003 to 2004 Lakers season and ended any chance of a working relationship between Malone and Kobe. The shift from respect to hostility was immediate. Walk into that moment. The Lakers added Malone because they were building a veteran-heavy roster with title expectations. Kobe respected players who showed up early, worked without shortcuts, and treated winning as a job. Malone fit the profile. He wasn't flashy, and he wasn't casual. He played through pain, ran the floor hard, and brought a serious tone to practices. For the early part of the season, the chemistry looked functional. If anything, Kobe seemed willing to embrace Malone's presence. Everything flipped mid-season. Kobe accused Malone of making inappropriate comments to his wife while sitting courtside. According to Kobe, the remark crossed a personal boundary instantly. He didn't frame it as a misunderstanding or an awkward joke. He took it as disrespect, and once he reached that conclusion, the path was set. He went to the media, stated his version clearly, and said he wanted nothing to do with Malone. The wording pulled no basote, punches. He called Malone a clown and made it clear the relationship was over. Malone rejected the accusation immediately. His response was firm, not evasive. He said he never meant anything inappropriate, never intended any disrespect, and had no idea why the situation escalated so quickly. To him, it felt like the story came out of nowhere. He tried to treat it as a miscommunication, but Kobe wasn't backing off. The Lakers had no way to bridge the gap with two players who stood on opposite sides of a line drawn in permanent ink. The timing made things even worse. Los Angeles was already tense. Shaq and Kobe were fracturing. Phil Jackson was juggling egos and fatigue. Every news cycle swirled around off-court drama. Adding a personal dispute between Kobe and Malone piled more weight onto an already unstable season. There was no internal meeting that fixed it. No veteran intervention. No moment of clarity where the tension eased. The issue stayed raw. Malone chose not to return to the Lakers the next season. At the time, he cited injuries and uncertainty, but nobody missed the underlying truth. A locker room cannot function when the franchise's star wants nothing to do with a teammate he openly called out. The door closed for good. Whenever Malone spoke about that year later, he kept his tone flat and brief, like the entire situation was something he had no interest in reliving. Kobe never revisited it with warmth either. Next is Hakeem Olajuwon.
Yeah, people are squaring off right now, and there's a lot of...
The only superstar matchup Malone always described with a mix of frustration and bruises that never quite faded. Go back to those Jazz Rockets series in the 90s. Utah had the physical edge with Malone's strength and Stockton's discipline. Houston had Olajuwon, a center who could erase possessions without leaving a mark. Hakeem guarded with timing instead of weight. He waited for the gathering, slid to the angle, and blocked shots that looked clean until the replay confirmed they were even cleaner. For Malone, built on force and direct lines, Hakeem's ability to absorb contact and still win the exchange drove him nuts. Add in the whistles. Malone believed Hakeem got superstar calls in every meeting. Utah fans felt the same. Drive into him, initiate contact, get nothing. Hakeem bumped you the other way. Whistle blows. Whether that's bias or perception, Malone lived on physical advantages. So when he didn't get the calls he expected, the irritation built. You can see it in old footage. Malone hits the post, spins, takes the bump, looks at the ref, and raises his eyebrows with that mix of disbelief and annoyance. Those series were built on attrition. Houston slowed the game until every possession felt like a negotiation. Hakeem anchored the half court, forced Malone to shoot over length, and cut off the middle of the floor. Anytime Utah tried to feed the post, Houston helped to shrink the space, trusting Olajuwon to cover the gaps. Malone still scored, but nothing came easy. The Rockets wanted to turn him into a volume player. Some nights it worked. Malone didn't just rely on skill, he used physical messages. Hard fouls were part of his nightly equipment. Against Hakeem, those hits bounced off like he was striking a pole. Olajuwon didn't respond with anger or theatrics. He stayed calm, reset, and kept dominating the angles. That indifference bothered Malone almost as much as the defense itself. When you hit someone and they don't react, it changes the psychology of the fight. Houston's role players added spice. Robert Horry, Mario Elie, and Vernon Maxwell all accused Malone of playing dirty. They said he used elbows as weapons and lowered shoulders with intentions that went beyond basketball. That public framing annoyed Malone deeply. He never saw himself as dirty. He saw himself as tough. But Houston players kept pushing that narrative, and it stuck around the rivalry like a bad smell. And that leads into the last name on Malone's list, Charles Barkley.
Malone just knocked Barkley over, who fell into Stockton.
Chuck was the one rivalry Malone never fully escaped. Not because they hated each other off the court, but because every time they met on it, something cracked. Both were built like brick walls. Both played with blunt force. Both believed the other player got away with too much. That combination produced real fights, real grudges, and a style clash that never cooled. Their history goes back to the early 90s when the Suns and Jazz were both hunting the same territory: Western Conference power, physical identity, a path toward the finals. Barkley carried his team with flair and attitude. Malone carried his with structure and silence. Whenever they collided, you could feel the temperature climb. Neither man backed up, neither man blinked, and neither man pretended it was friendly. The flashpoint landed in 1992. Utah and Phoenix met, tempers boiled, and the two big men finally snapped. Barkley swung. Malone swung back. It was not a skirmish. It was a real fight with real intentions. Malone later said he was ready to go for real. Barkley said Malone would swing on you without hesitation. Those comments were not jokes. They were reflections of the era and how these two treated the matchup. After that, every meeting carried a residue. Barkley tried to beat Malone with quickness and footwork. Malone tried to beat Barkley with strength and contact. The Suns spaced the floor and forced Malone to defend in space. The Jazz tightened the half court and made Barkley work through bodies. The battles were tactical, but the tone was personal. Both men spent entire games pushing, grabbing, bumping, and testing the officials. The cameras caught it all. What makes this rivalry memorable is how honest it became once both careers settled. Barkley joked about Malone being the type to punch first. Malone talked about Barkley like a man who earned every bruise. There was mutual respect, but never softness. They were too similar in mentality to ignore each other and too competitive to let anything slide. Karl Malone's rivalries weren't petty footnotes. They were collisions that defined an era built on toughness, ego, and moments nobody forgot. Every name here pushed him, bruised him, or crossed the line. If you enjoyed the breakdown, support the channel, drop a like, and stick around for the next deep dive.